Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. The story of the Tree Council of Ireland is, in many ways, the story of how Ireland came to see trees, biodiversity and community action as deeply connected. And there are few people better placed to tell that story than Dr Christy Boylan, founding member and first president of the Tree Council of Ireland, and someone who has helped shape the living fabric of our cities, from the great expanses of Phoenix Park to the smallest pocket parks.
Well, thank you very much, Brenda, for that introduction. I'm delighted to be presenting this story of the Tree Council. So this first slide is an outline of what will follow in the next 30, 40 slides. So you can see the beginnings started with Trees for Ireland, and I'll go through that in more detail as we progress. Then we had other organisations like the Landscape Association of Ireland. On Taisce, Trees Committee played a big role here as well. But we had the first meetings, and we talk about those. We registered the company as a charitable organisation, and we established presidents, patrons, and we were assisted greatly by FOSS workers. Now I'm telling the story through a series of projects. And in 1985, Professor Clark, he planted a tree in Timon Urban Forest, and that was the first official National Tree Week run by the Tree Council, and by its patron, Professor Clark, was the celebrant, we'll say, in the case of the tree planting. We had a limited draw in 1985, and that raised some funding. And the first project we got underway was Grow a Tree for Ireland with Boyne Valley Honey, the manager of which was Malachy McCluskey, and he died in recent years. In 86, we had Trees for Survival, an exhibition that was run by Brian Arnold. And then in 87, we had 3 week launched in Glenstall Abbey in Moreau, County Limerick. 1987, we established the broadleaf policy, or rather a policy on broadleaf woodlands. And surprise, surprise, we got an episode on Glenroe, which was a weekly soap opera of a rural family in Ireland. And it was great. We starred in the show, and we'll show you some pictures of that. The Millennium Arboretum was established in 1988 because Dublin was celebrating a millennium from 988, or a certain period in its establishment. And then we had, with one of our sponsors, Pitney Bowes, a project of elms across Europe, because it was in the aftermath of the Dutch elm disease, where many elms had been killed with this disease. 1989, we had a National Tree Week launch in Enniscorthy with Mr. Michael Smith, who is the new Minister for Forestry. And in 89, we planted, there were no trees in the school at St. Francis Xavier in Castleknock, where my girls went to school, and it was next door to me, so I worked with the teachers on that. And then in 89, we established the Friends of the Tree Council of Ireland, which was a money-raising exercise. So now here's some pictures of in 1984, there was an Arbor Day by the Trees for Ireland, and you can see they had Dr. Patrick Hillary. It looks like it was a very cold day. See him holding his jacket, his coat. This was a planting of a specimen of ash in the grounds of Orson. In that picture, you have the man with the hat was David Luke. See his picture inset in the bottom. He was a very active member of Trees for Ireland, and some other people who worked in the Phoenix Park at the time. The man in the middle of the picture is H.M. Fitzpatrick, Hugh Morris Fitzpatrick, and he lived to be the grand old age of 92, and he was quite an authority on trees. So he wrote this book, The Story of Our Trees, which was published by Trees for Ireland. And these are some excerpts from publications done by the Trees for Ireland. Mr. Fitzpatrick was regarded as a doyen of foresters by Owen Neeson, who wrote a book on forestry. So this was one of the first series of illustrations done on trees. You can see the oak and it was in Irish as well. It showed you the difference between the leaves and the acorns and so on. So these drawings were done by a lady called Rosaline Murphy, and she was a member of the Trees for Ireland for many years. It's a very good publication, and you can get it online. Now, Trees for Ireland lasted for some years until it was decided that it was no need for it to exist, because the Tree Council was doing much of its work, and of course there was also CRON, which was a newer form of what Trees for Ireland were doing in the past. And many of the people in Trees for Ireland were getting old, so in 2003 there was a tree planting ceremony in the Phoenix Park, where a tree was planted by Ruairi Brewer. You can see him approaching the tree here, and behind him is Dr. Jack Durand, and Maura de Brewer you can see sitting on a seat in the top picture as well. These were founding members, you could say, and they brought Trees for Ireland all through until then. And sadly, they're all dead at this stage, and some of the people who attended that little ceremony are dead too. But the tree is growing very well in the Phoenix Park. So it lived for 52 years and was celebrated with this tree planting in the Phoenix Park by Ruairi Brewer, Dr. Jack Durand, and other members. Then there was the newsletter of the Society of Irish Foresters. There was a little bit of history here where it talked about Trees for Ireland. Now, we won't be able to read all this because it wouldn't be fair, but you can stop the presentation in your own time when it's after the recording, and you can read through it. But you can see that Sean McBride was one of the people, he was a minister in the government, who started the whole forestry planting back in 47, but Trees for Ireland was established in 1950 there. And you can see it was supported by the GAA and various other groups. And some of the people in that were Kathleen Delap. I have underlined her name because she was one of the first people in the Tree Council of Ireland. And the other people down below, their names are underlined as well. So that's a little bit of history back in the middle of the 20th century. Then we move on, and the Landscape Association of Ireland was formed in 1977. I was involved in that with some colleagues in forestry. As you can see in the picture down here, you've John McCullen on the left and Dennis Shannon and some other people there. So we produced some 4 publications, and it was a great way for horticulturists and foresters to work together and helped in the formation of the Tree Council of Ireland. Joe Deasy is the man second from left in the picture, a brother of Dan Deasy, and he was also very much involved with this Landscape Association. But the forestry people had the Society of Foresters, and they admitted later on that their home was there. So we merged this association with the Institute of Landscape, with the Irish Landscape Institute of Landscape Horticulture of Ireland, and in 1992 it was merged and is now the Irish Landscape Institute. So in 1984, the Trees Committee of Antasca was organised, and they organised National Tree Week. In 84, September the 15th, the Tree Council of Ireland was launched at a seminar in Trinity College, and the Forest and Wildlife Service provided £500 initial funding for that to happen. And in 1985, there was an inaugural meeting of the Tree Council of Ireland in the zoo, and that was followed by a tree planting with Sean McBride. And on May the 24th, we had our first election of the executive, where I was elected president and remained president for 5 years. Peter Cuthbert was the vice president, Joseph McConville was secretary, and Richard Webb was the treasurer. And we used to use the offices at St. Martin's House, Waterloo, which at that time was the offices of Forest Forberdale. Now, this is a list of the presidents over the years and some of the pictures. You can see the years that were there. And I think there's a picture of everybody here. And with the exception of Kevin Hutchinson in the middle at the bottom of the picture, everybody is still alive. Poor Kevin died not long after he was president. So you can see in the top picture, Professor Clark with some of us, myself, John McCullen, Margaret Gormley and Fergal Malloy, Mary Keenan in the middle centre with two of her children, Éanni Lowner down near the bottom in the purple coat and looking into it, an unusual picture looking into a hole for a tree. She was president twice. Now you see down in the bottom right, John McLaughlin, and you have Brendan, who's the current chief executive, and you've Joe over on the left-hand side, you've Joe McConville, and the current president, Cormac Downey. We had four patrons, beg your pardon. The first was Professor Clark, and then we had Sean McBride, and we had Dr. Michael Smurford, and we also had Mr. Ambrose Congreve, who owned the Mount Congreve estate down in outside Waterford. Now, Dr. Michael Smurford is the only one who's still alive. And he was helpful to us in the past, which we'll explain in a few moments. We were also helped with the FOSS Community Employment Scheme. And over that period, about 40 persons served the Tree Council in about 10 years. And this is a list of the names of those people who helped very much. You can see Art Caffrey in the bottom left. He was with us for many years. Michael Walsh and Ronan Madden are up on the left. Paddy Kelly became the first director, who was sponsored by the Cuilche. And Isabelle Le Marie was a French lady who was a secretary for many years. When we started the draw, the idea was that every ticket was £100, and we hoped to sell 2,000 with a prize fund of 90,000, and we hoped to make a profit of 110,000. Now, Dr. Smurford bought about 25 of these, which was nice. And unfortunately, we couldn't sell 2,000 tickets. We sold 1,300 tickets, which meant we made a profit of about 30,000. But at that time, 30,000 would have bought a house. And we were interested in buying a house, but we chose instead to put it in the money as the interest of which we would use to fund the activities of the Tree Council. But we also funded Cron with the first group to request funding for their projects was Cron, and we provided some to them. And it was to assist in the formation and to the Irish Tree Society to help the purchase of Coolatin Oak woodlands. Now, it didn't go far in purchasing that, but some people won a car. Here is myself with a friend of mine, Christy Crosby, and Barry Kane up here. I sold many of these tickets through my time in Dublin Corporation, and so consequently we had a good few winners from them. So we had to postpone the March draw to April and so on, but eventually it was a great success and we were very pleased with it. Professor Clark planted a tree in Timon Park. You can see where the arrow is pointing where the first trees were planted, and all around you can see that in recent years this aerial picture shows how well that woodland has developed. The project with Boyne Valley Honey the idea was to encourage participation in community planting by inviting consumers of 12-ounce jars of honey to return 5 labels, in return for which a tree was planted in a community. So we made up this community planting, which was 5 half-standard trees and 15 transplants. So that meant 20 of these vouchers. 5 by 20 was 100. If you got 100 vouchers back, that was 100 jars of honey. Boyne Valley Honey purchased these trees and sent them to you for planting with instructions which we prepared. This was very successful for us, and it gave us great exposure, we'll say, in the first few years. There was an option for individuals to return tree labels with a sum of money and have a tree for the garden. And all of the work was done by Boyne Valley Honey, acquiring the trees. We helped them, of course, and having the trees delivered. And this leaflet was prepared with questions and answers to explain to them, to the people, how the scheme would work and how to take care of the trees and the aims of the project. And this was the planting of a tree to launch the scheme by John Boylan, who was Minister for the Environment, and this was in the Custom House. And if you look down to the bottom scene, you see the picture I got from Google in 2009 would show that tree where you can see in the middle of the picture. So it's an evergreen oak, and it grew very well. And Sean McBride is over here on the right hand side. He was a help to us as well. So it was a very successful little scheme. There was a concern about trees not growing well in some parts of the country because of the lack of water and various things. And Brian Arnold launched this. He got the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Nora Owens, to launch this exhibition in the Gallery of Photography. And this publication went with it as well. And that was done during 3 weeks, and it was very successful. In Glenstall Abbey on 1987, we launched National Tree Week, and we went there because Brother Anthony, you see in this top picture, was a great advocate and still is of planting trees in the grounds of the Abbey. And Michael Hannon, you can see in the middle of the picture here, was very helpful. Himself and Peter Cuthbert went down the day before and prepared the project for our launch on the next day, Sunday. It was a new experience for myself and several others because we ate with the monks in their refectory, and it was one of these quiet lunches where we listened to the words of St. Benedict. But when we started eating, it was anything but quiet because all the utensils were aluminium or whatever, and they were all banging into each other onto the hard tables. So it was a great new experience, and it was a very successful scheme, and we're very proud of that too. Now, we also followed up with recommendations on the national policy for broadleaf woodlands, and this was presented to Michael Smith, who was down in the left side talking with me. We went to Larch Hill to Braddon, one of several tree planting ceremonies which we did with the Catholic Boy Scouts of Ireland. And he followed up, taking the advice on board. It was the first such document prepared by the Tree Council and presented to Michael Smith in May 87, and some months later he implemented one of the recommendations by introducing improved grants for broadleaf woodlands. And these measures were announced on December 11, 87 at a tree planting ceremony. Now, there's been several grant schemes undertaken in the years that followed, but that was the first for us. This was a major little event that happened. Glenroe in the era of one channel, you could say, before all these channels were streamed into our homes, we had RTE, and the most popular program was Glenroe. And you can see Joe Lynch was a very famous actor at the time, and he played Dinny in this show. So I remember writing to the producers, and I asked them, would they like to include a tree planting ceremony as part of the show? And they came back and said yes, and they invited us to go along to that ceremony. So we went out to Glenroe, out, what you know the name of the place, Brendan, out in Wicklow, and to this church, and we had this tree planting ceremony. You can see the tree when Joe was standing against the stake. This is a clip from the production, and that's the tree in the middle of the picture, a lovely tree taken a few years ago. I go back after years and I try and find how these trees have grown. Now, also in that picture is Richard Webb with the cap on the left. He lives in England now, and he's in the bottom picture. The man on the left is Eamon. In the bottom picture is Eamon, who was a colleague of mine in UCD, and he was an advisor in Wicklow, and he has died since, unfortunately, as have Joe Lynch and Rory Brewer. So looking at this is nostalgic, but we're looking at old pictures which inevitably some people are not alive today. The June 2013 is when I took that picture, and I've gone back since. A project with which I was very excited about was the Millennium Arboretum. And this was an idea because the millennium was all the talk before the real millennium came in 2000. And we were all looking for ideas. And the idea I came up with was plant an arboretum with 1,000 different trees and to have 1,000 sponsors. So we launched that, and we did get 1,000 trees with a lot of trouble, 1,000 different trees, but a lot of those were varieties of species, because it's hard to get 1,000 different species. And we got some donations, but we chose a 16-acre site in St. Anne's Park, and the trees were planted, and the trees are grown very well there today. Ben Briscoe was the Lord Mayor of Dublin at the time, and he was very excited about it. So we presented him with a book of all the 1,000 sponsors, and that is now buried under the spire in O'Connell Street. And it will be opened in 1988. Sorry, it'll be opened in 2088, and then we'll see who the names are. But of course, all those names are available from the Tree Council if anybody is interested in finding out. This was some pictures of the Arboretum before it was started, and you can see the layout. It crosses over the River Nanikin. It's divided up into continents, like you've the Asian trees in the top piece near All Saints Road in Raheny, and the Irish section is near the main avenue. We've also a European section, North American, Australasian, South America. So it's an area for education very much. If you look to the right, you'll see the layout of St. Anne's Park, and the red is the extent of the Arboretum within this 300-acre park. A friend of mine who lives in Raheny, near the place, takes a lot of pictures of the Arboretum, and he called his house Arboretum View. His name is Leo George Devitt. So he sends me pictures all the time, and this was a little collection of pictures he put together of events taking place there for various plantings, and even in winter scenes from his house, and how it has grown very well. So it's a great little project, and it's something to have that will stand us for hundreds of years. I take pictures of it from time to time. So you can see in 88, when we laid out the pathways, which we used stone first and then bark. We then planted the trees. You can see how it has grown and over the decades, and I actually need to go out now and take a picture these days when these cherries are in bloom. In the bottom picture, it was after that flowered. So it's a successful project. And it's also been used for other plantings. For example, this lime tree, Tilia platyphilus, was planted in 1994 to commemorate Jim Shannon, who was my boss at one stage, the former park superintendent. In the bottom picture, you can see the Irish yew, because that's in the Irish section, because we have Irish cultivars as well as Irish natives there. And you can see how that was 2014, so you can see how well those trees have grown. Now, Pitney Bowes were a sponsor for many years, because John Barry, the chief executive, was very keen, and Pitney Bowes themselves had introduced Sapporo Autumn Gold, which was an elm tree from Japan, which was going to be resistant to Dutch elm disease. And this was one of the charts which were prepared to explain the problems of how this disease spread. But this beetle was the vector that carried it from tree to tree, and then it spread within the tree. So the project was Elms Across Europe. So they were on board as a sponsor of the Tree Council promoting this project. So the roots of the Conservation Foundation go back to an elm planting ceremony in October 79 in Harlow, Essex. And at that stage, 15 million English elms had been killed by the disease. The new trees planted were Sapor Autumn Gold, and they were developed at the University of Wisconsin to be resistant to the lethal disease. Saplings were planted by the US Ambassador Kingman Brewster at the European headquarters, and so on. So then Pitney Bowes undertook that they would spread these trees around Europe. So Ireland was part of that. So to promote that, they had David Bellamy, the well-known conservationist, come to Dublin and plant a tree in the grounds of the Irish Management Institute. And John Barry is on the left with myself and David Bellamy in the middle, and then people from the Irish Management Institute in the picture as well. And that was, and now my screen is hidden by some function bars, so you can't see the trees very well when I took a picture in 1993, but they've grown quite well. So elms across Europe raised awareness of the plight of the English elm and helped to provide a tree which enabled elm biodiversity to be maintained. And the scheme also showed commercial organisations that there was opportunity for them to become involved in environmental issues. As a result, Pitney Bowes supported the launch of the Conservation Foundation in '82, but they came on board with us then when we were established. Now, in 1989, we had the launch of National Tree Week at the Christian Brothers School in Enniscorthy, County Wexford. Now, this was done in association with the local Lions Club, and it was a fantastic event, and we had great support from them. But in the top picture you see in June '91, which a few months after the trees were planted, there was nothing on this little half circle in front of the school. So we planted a number of trees, which probably too many, but there were various dignitaries were given an opportunity to plant trees, one of which was Minister for Forestry, Michael Smith. Now, as we started Michael Smith, he got on this carriage with a horse drawn by a horse, and I was up with the driver. And we got on this carriage outside the hotel in the middle of Enniscorthy, and we drove, the horse brought us, and there was a parade behind us, and a lot of people stood on the street watching us go by. It was a wonderful event. And when we got to the school, there was full of people, and they cheered. And when they cheered, the horse bolted. So when he bolted, he fell. But the minister got out of his carriage and went over and caught a hold of the reins and calmed down the horse, and then proceeded to bring him around that little arch, and everybody got out and the planting took place. And while I was there, that's not me now in the picture, that's someone else, I don't know who that is, but while I was looking at this, I couldn't get out of the carriage because the horse had twisted it. RTE were up on the hill filming it. So it all went out on the 6 o'clock news. It was great publicity for us. Now, when you go back to, as I've done over the years, you can see how those trees have grown. So it's arguable that they're too big now and they need thinning, but that last picture on the bottom right was 2009. So I imagine it's quite big now. Now, some other activities around '89, out around, this is Michael Smith planting a tree in Deer Park, which is in the south side of Dublin, with various people, including myself. Michael Lynch in the middle was the head of the Parks Department in Dublin County Council. He's now retired. And Leslie Moore on the left is the current head of the Parks Department in Dublin City Council. Niamh Brannock is the politician with the minister there. Those trees have all grown very well. Now, in 1989, there was our girls went to the local school, St. Francis Xavier, and as you can see in these pictures, there were no trees in it. So I felt we had to do something about it. So I worked with the teacher there and we came up with a project. We learned at the time that the Department of Education will not provide money for tree planting, but they will for fences. So this is why you didn't have any trees in it. But this school built in the 1970s had something like 800 children. I think it is a lot more now. It's been extended. But the construction budget did not include any tree or shrub planting. So we had a project undertaken with Kevin Hussey and the cooperation of teachers, parents and children, and we raised something like €30,000 or pounds it was at the time, and we bought trees and the parents helped plant them. So you can see some of the pictures before and after on 89 before at the entrance, and Brian Lenihan, the father, we'll say, who was Taoiseach at the time, he planted the trees at the entrance that you can see here. And on 1992, you can see how they're growing. And it was a great little event, and it's very successful today. These are some pictures of the parents planting the trees, and they came out on Saturdays, and the children came as well. And then we had special events with the children. So it's a great success, and this is where it's located, near Tesco in Blanchardstown. Now, the Friends of the Tree Council were launched in 1989, and we were conscious of the need to establish a long-term system of financing the operations of the Tree Council, and we came up with this scheme. Dr. Michael Smurford launched the scheme on the 3rd of May at the Smurford Group headquarters, and a number of company directors were invited. And Joe Whittaker did the displays and provided a video display free of charge. The scheme was intended to raise sufficient funds for the support of a full-time director and to assist in the management of the council's affairs and to develop and promote projects. And the firm of Nokia were the first company to use the Friends scheme following initial contact made in July 89, and we came up with a special logo. So this was a picture of Michael Smurford launching that. So we had a 3-week launch in Ardagh, County Longford, and that was then followed by Dr. Alex Shago, who was a famous tree expert, researcher. 1991 National Tree Week was launched in Malahide with Charles Haughey, a resident from nearby. We had the Ireland's golden success at Osaka in 1991 as well. We also talked about urban forestry in 1991, which was relatively a new topic at the time. In 1992, we had National Tree Week in Kilkenny, and then we had our promotional poster launched in that year as well. And we produced a book on trees on the farm. In 1993, we had a National Tree Week launch in Clonmel, and we also had Andy Acorn, who was a costume put together by somebody and he appeared at National Tree Week events and so on. 1993 was global relief discussions and also the 4 provinces Oak Project. Trees for Peace was another discussion, and then was a move to the Royal Hospital Kilmainham offices, where we were for a period. The project EcoStem was launched in that year as well, and that's in the form of Balrat urban forest. We moved to 1994, which with National Tree Week in Killaloe, and Andy Acorn was there as well. Professor Clark, we had a planting with him in 1994, and in near where his office was. And 1995 was the Famine Commemorative Arboretum in Corker Park. 1996 was a decade of growth. And then we had various other activities, Plantathon in Corker Park, and moving down to 2016, where we had the 7 trees for 7 signatories. So that's the outline of what is in this second presentation. This is an interesting picture. You look at everybody looking around and looking up into the heavens. And this was the launch in Ardagh, County Longford. And you can see we weren't short of government ministers for that launch. in 1994. And the umbrellas are Elms Across Europe, supplied by John Barry on the right-hand side. You see me on the left, and then Charles Haughey and Albert Reynolds and Seamus Kane, who was the local chair of the Tidy Towns in Ardagh, County Longford. This is interesting because I'm the only one who's alive today, which is nice to know, but obviously I was much younger than the rest of them at the time. But it's part of our history. Now, this was also an occasion when we had the first official planting of the national tree, Quercus petrea, the sessile oak, and it was done by Charles Haughey. And you can see we also had Mary O'Rourke, who was the Minister of the Government as well. This was a big event. We had a lovely lunch with the community in the community centre beforehand, and we presented him with a trophy at the end. It's a good story because the local canon wasn't a great advocate of tree planting by any means, but he was a real fan of Charles Haughey. So he gave permission all around him for the event to happen in the school grounds and so on. These are some pictures which I took of those trees in that were planted then in 1994. I took the pictures in 2012, and the sad thing is that the sign that's there, it was timber and it didn't survive. So maybe, Brendan, it would be an idea to get a nice sign that would last longer, maybe a stone or something, because that's an important official planting. And go down there and have a little ceremony sometime. If you come back to me on that, we can follow it up, because the trees are growing very well. Now, I mentioned earlier that Ambrose Congreve was a patron, and Ambrose Congreve, who lived to be 104, by the way. And this was him in 1990. A very tall man. He used to invite the Tree Council down every year. So we'd hire a bus and we'd go down, and he'd feed us, and he'd give us a full day's tour of the garden. And he'd give us a cheque for £100 when we were leaving. And then the right-hand side is Herman Doole, and he was his gardener who helped develop Mount Congreve. So Mount Congreve today is now managed by Waterford County Council, and they've made marvellous changes to the place. 70 acres of a wonderful collection of trees and shrubs from all around the world. The picture below is a more recent picture taken of a Tree Council visit to Mount Congreve. Dr. Alex Shigo was an American researcher who came up with a whole new way of looking at diseases of trees. And John McCullen had learned about this, and he invited him to come to Dublin as a guest of the Tree Council of Ireland and present a one-day seminar and a week-long workshop. So this is the group of people who attended the workshop. You see John McCullen on the right-hand side there. It was very, very interesting. We also got him on an hour nearly on the Gayborn radio show in the morning, and that promoted the lecture, the seminar at UCD, which was attended by 300 people. So it was a wonderful, he was changing the whole practice of managing trees, one of which was not to bother painting wounds because it didn't do any good. He wrote several books on the subject, and you can see he died in 2006. And it was a great little bit of a promotion for the Tree Council of Ireland as well. And then we had other sessions of seminars or conferences held on his material afterwards. Mary Robinson became president, the first woman president, and John McCullen, being in the Phoenix Park, got her to plant a tree in 1991. You can see the plaque on the top right. It's a beech planted in the grounds, and this was a very snowy day, and you can see us all walking back from the tree planting. I took a video of this. I have the video still, and these are clips I took from the video. And that's pictures again I've taken of the tree over the years. Also, we launched National Tree Week in Malahide because it was the overall winner of the Tidy Towns competition in 1990. And Charles Haughey, who lived nearby, performed the official launch. You can see he came out in a jumper down the road, and Betty Carr is the lady on the right-hand side. She was the Tidy Towns judge. We had Matt McNulty, who was Director General of Board Fáilte. That time they organised the National Tree Week, the Tidy Towns, and so it was very good. He planted a Sapporo Autumn Gold in Kinseely on a Sunday morning. You can see this was a private event we had, and he was writing a speech for an Ardèche. So we were invited in after the planting. We spent a little bit of time with him in his private bar, and he told us lots of stories about government at the time, which were very interesting. These are some pictures from of National Tree Week planting. We also had some music, some culture, and you can see the trees taken a few years ago have all done very well, and they're now in the care of Fingal County Council. In 1991, we had a little event which was to celebrate the success of Ireland at the Osaka Expo 90, which was a garden festival in Japan. And the origins of this was that Charles Haughey as Taoiseach went to visit Japan. And the organisers said, won't Ireland have a garden in this competition? And, oh yes, we will, he said. So when he came back, he asked John Joe Costin and Martin Hallinan to do this garden. There was no competition within Ireland for it. He just asked them to do it. They did it, and they built a West of Ireland scene in Japan, and the Japanese were thrilled with it. So it won the best garden in the whole festival. And the occasion, the Tree Council was asked, would they organise an event for this to make an award to Charles Haughey and to the people who did it. And that was done in the Royal Hospital, Kilmainham, in March 1991. And you can see the Japanese ambassador was at this event, and John Barry and so on. So that was a little a sideshow, you could say, from general activities that the Tree Council was doing. We also came up with this idea of an urban forestry conference. The first one to be held in Dublin was on the 7th of June 1991. Robert Malloy, who was the Minister for Energy and Forestry, launched this project during National Tree Week in Limerick. It took place in the grounds of the Maternity Hospital in Limerick, when a birch to represent motherhood, ash to represent heritage, and an oak to represent Ireland's national tree were planted. Groves of trees were planted by parents of children born during the first 3 months of 1991 to link their birth to a new concept for Limerick and Ireland. A follow-up conference was organised then, and speakers included Fergal Malloy, Mark Johnston and Mike Kilby from the Countryside Commission. So that's a successful little event from 1991. Then we went down to Kilkenny in 1992, and this was very interesting because we had asked Taoiseach Charles Haughey to do this, and he agreed. In fact, he would never say no to us, I think, because every year we wanted to do it. He was very keen on it. But unfortunately for all of us, there was a little coup took place in the week of before National Tree Week started, when Albert Reynolds and his friends outvoted Charlie, and he was actually sacked by the government and he had to resign. He lost the vote. And that was, say, midweek. I don't know the exact day or date. But when he went back home, he made a call to the Tree Council offices and said, I am still going to do 3 week, even though I'm not Taoiseach, in Kilkenny on Sunday. So it put us in a difficult position because we didn't want to offend the government of the day, but we had asked him, and we all honoured the occasion. Now, the funny thing about this was Ambrose Congreve came all the way from Waterford to this event, the only event he ever came to, as patron. And we understood this because he was a very good friend of Charles Haughey. When Charles Haughey was Minister for Finance, he brought in some measures to allow people to be non-resident for certain times in the year, and therefore they weren't liable for Irish tax. So that's one reason he was a good friend of his. So this was the event. The trees were planted, and you can see the chairman of the council there holding the spade. And we also did this with Macra na Firma, and that's Matt O'Keefe, I think, was the guy from Macra na Firma. And the trees were planted on the side of the bypass, as it was at that time, which was only a simple road. But unfortunately, they came in with a dual carriageway as a bypass, and the trees all disappeared. So there's no trees left for that event. But I have to say, they weren't doing very well anyway. They weren't looked after. The weeds had taken over. Weed establishment had already impacted on the newly planted trees. But that's one of those events. And then the top picture on the right was from the Sunday Tribune. What was he to do? Now to gardening. I thought it was a very funny heading to put in there, and how apt for us. Now, Margaret Gormley initiated the first poster competition. She was president at the time, to replace the leaflet which was circulated in previous years. And this was arranged through Bill Bolger, the National College of Art and Design, and an attractive cartoon poster designed by Anne Morrison was chosen as the overall winner. And at the pre-launch in 1992, with John Barry, director, with Martin Lowry, chief executive, Culture, Bertie Ahern, John McCullen, John was the president at the time, and there's Matt O'Keefe. And so that was the first poster that was done, and the posters have been very successful ever since. We also produced a book called Trees on the Farm, which Michael Bulfin wrote. He was a researcher in Kinseely Research Centre, and we got funding from Zeneca Crop Protection, and was published as a publication by the Tree Council of Ireland. And it was at the time when the advent of improved grants for forestry, there was a need to provide information to the farming community on the establishment, maintenance and management of farm woodland in a form that was easily accessible. Increased funding for farm planting had encouraged a huge increase in the enterprise, and the need for such information was growing. So that's why the Trees on the Farm was produced. It was the first book published. This is a picture of Michael Bulfin on the bottom right. 1993, we went to Clonmel to launch Tree Week, and Michael Smith, this was his home turf, you could say. He's from Tipperary, and we got the cooperation of Clonmel Corporation at the time to plant some trees on their open spaces. So that was very nice. You can see some people there, Maura de Brewer, John Barry, and so on with the minister. And this is Paddy O'Keefe planting a tree. He was the gardener in Clonmel. We knew him well, and he was a great supporter of the Tree Council. So we had this occasion where he planted this tree. He retired some few years later. Also in Clonmel, we had publicity for the events, included newspaper coverage, and of course Glenroe, which I should have said earlier is the village of Kilcool in Wicklow. And so we had the Den. We also broke into children's programs and had the Den and a competition there, and that competition was for Andy Acorn was the winner of that. So we came up with this mascot, you could say, of Andy Acorn, who's standing behind Mary McAvoy, who was known as Biddy in Glenroe. And this is Brian Sheehan's son, Connor, in the picture. Global Relief was another project at the time, a citizens' action and education program for trees and forests based in Washington, D.C. It was developed in 1988 by American Forests. The Tree Council discussed the possibility of joining the international section, and the aim was to represent the entire island of Ireland. And the partnership provided opportunities for the exchange of information, access to international projects, and support for fundraising activities. This allowed Director Paddy O'Kelly to visit, at no expense to the Tree Council, the North American Urban Forestry Conference in Minneapolis. And subsequently in 1994, this linkage was further strengthened when our Treasurer John McLaughlin marked the association with Global Relief by planting a tree in the grounds of the Irish residency in Washington, D.C. So since its inception in 88, there was 30 million trees planted by 2020. Another project we had was the Four Provinces Oak Project, and these were discussions with the Mitsubishi Electric Ireland Foundation, and we had a tree planting and tree awareness project. 3 full-colour posters in English, Irish and Latin of 30 trees in the Irish landscape. These were our first posters of trees. And the aim was to have plantations of oak trees in every province. It began in Connacht, so on October the 18th, 10,000 oak trees to celebrate Mayo 5000, and we had a ceremony at Ennisco, Crossmolina, County Mayo, as you can see in the picture. So there's a new recreational forest on land owned by Susan Kellett and managed by Michael Ford. And we won a merit in the Royal Dublin Society's Forestry Amenity Woodland Award Scheme. Excuse me. So a Tree for Peace and Millennium Arboretum. On December the 9th, to mark the British National Tree Week and to help advance the cause of peace on this island, the Tree Council invited the British Ambassador David Bladderwick to plant a dove or handkerchief tree in Davidian Volucrata in the Millennium Arboretum in St Anne's Park, Raheny. And the tree was presented by Madeline Jay, who owned Mount Usher Gardens in Wicklow at the time. Other activities was we moved on December the 16th from our offices in Smurford Building in Botanic Road to the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham. And the new offices allowed sufficient space to accommodate increased staff numbers, which we were getting through FOSS. So the strategy for the development of the forest industry to the year 2015, we made a submission to the Forest Service on that topic. EcoSTEM was another project that was started. This was the outdoor classroom at Ballarat, County Meath. Now, this was a broadleaf forest mainly that existed, was owned by Quilcher in Meath. And it was through an agreement, it was transferred to the Tree Council. So it was recognised that it would be a challenging project to establish a woodland trust, and the objectives of the trust would be to manage and establish woodland on the best silviculture practices without compromise to the environment and to demonstrate best practice for educational purposes. To this end, the EcoSTEM, Fergal Malloy was great at this stuff. He came up with a name and it all meant something. The environmental compatibility through silvicultural treatment, education and motivation. It was established in 1993, the first such trust in Ireland, and it obtained official recognition by the Revenue Commissioners during 1993. So that was a great little project, which is still going. And this little table is just to show you a list of some of the various things that took place. I won't go through it because it's best you can study it in your own time. It's too small to be gone through. But some of these things we mentioned and some of them we haven't. And the acorn was here presented with Michael Higgins, who was then Minister for Arts, Culture and the Gaeltacht at the Royal Hospital on 15th February 94. He appeared then in 3 weeks in Roscrea as George Cunningham from Roscrea, and down in Clare in Ballina also there was a 3 week with Sinead de Valera. So this was where the mascot would come out. Now, Professor Clark, who was the first patron of the Tree Council, we felt we'd like to honour that. So we got him to plant a birch tree outside his old office at the former Albert College, which is now DCU, in November 1994. So this was attended by Tree Council members, many of which were presidents in the past. And there's the tree on the right-hand side. So that's another successful one. Inside, when he died, we had a little planting for the family inside in Albert College Park, and there's a plaque placed on that, which you can see in the top picture. And that tree is growing well in February 2014. So we have two trees, one he planted himself and another planted after his death. Now, another project was the Famine Commemorative Arboretum, and this was in 1994 because we were thinking about this whole effort of commemorating the 150th anniversary of the famine. And since we did well with the Millennium Arboretum and learned a bit, we came up with the Famine Commemorative Arboretum, which was only 150 different trees, not as ambitious as the Millennium Arboretum. And this was more doable, let's say. And by the way, we always planted 3 specimens of each tree because you never know what will happen, and it's nice to have them together. And if they're too close, you can reduce one of them in the years to come. This was done in Cork Park. Again, it was sponsored, and at this time it was £35. The Tree Council gained and bought the trees, and it's managed today by South Dublin County Council. You can see here on the top right is the drawing that's available on site. The groups of trees that you can see in the top right picture, and if you look to the middle of the picture, you'll see how they're doing. And the last picture I took of them, they're the continents. And at the bottom of the picture, where the red arrow is pointing, we had 5 trees of Quercus petraea, the sessile oak, which is the national tree. And each of those trees are aligned with one of the continents. So that shows you the Irish tree and the others are the trees from the other countries. There's no land, there's no trees between these trees and the continents because Ireland is an island surrounded by water, and you had to go into water to get out of it in a boat or a plane. And then there's a pathway going around the whole thing, and that represents the movement of Irish people around the world. So that is actually going through the Arboretum rather than around the outside. It's a very successful little project and is maintained by South Dublin County Council. We've had several people come and visit there. The bottom picture shows you the trees, the Quercus petraea, that was taken in 2014. And the stone on the left-hand side is the stone that explains it. And then you can see there's a lich gate with some information on it as well. In 2007, we had a World Parks Conference, and I brought people around some of the parks that time. And this guy standing behind me is from Australia, Neil McCarthy. And it was very interesting and a great opportunity to show the people these pictures. Now, The Decade of Growth is a book which I wrote in 1985 to highlight the work that was done in 1995, you should say, to highlight the work that was done in the first 10 years, most of which I've gone through there with you. And it's available, it should be available on a digital format for those who want to get it. I also took some pictures of the visits to Powerscourt, for example. We also had a summer trip every year. And in this case, I've added pictures all around, and all the circles are of pictures who were involved in the early days of the Tree Council. It's establishing it, and unfortunately, life moves on, and many of those people have since died. But some of those I've already spoken with you about in the presentation so far. Then we moved on, and I'm only mentioning a few projects from the period in the last few slides I have here now. I'm only mentioning a few projects that were done in the 30 years that have occurred since I wrote that book. So one is Troy, Tree Register of Ireland. It was originally the Tree Register of the British Isles, and it was a famous publication or a famous study. So the Tree Council got involved with this, and some of the people's names who worked on that are at the top piece. Discussions took place in 1990s. Mark Toomey was appointed as project manager, and various other people helped. Their names are there. And Aubrey Fennell is the person who did the field work, and he was later joined by Kate Crane. Funding was provided from the Irish Tree Society, who were very helpful in this, and the Heritage Council, and it enabled publication of this book, The Heritage Trees of Ireland, in 2014. And I was one of the steering committee for that book, and I contributed to the chapter on avenues with Aubrey Fennell. And that's a lovely book, and it's still available from the Tree Council. You can purchase it from the Tree Council. We had Abbey Leaks. We had a visit to Abbey Leaks in 2011, and here you can see Kevin Hutchinson, who spent his early years working in Abbey Leaks, with some Aubrey Fennell there beside Thomas Pakenham on the right-hand side. And it was a lovely visit for people to get together, always very useful and educational. And the Heritage, that would be representing the Irish Tree Society, but the heritage trees also included this tree, the king oak at Charleville in Tullamore, County Offaly, and you can see it's such a massive tree. It's one of our most important heritage trees, and unfortunately, it's still growing, but its branches have become so heavy. It's finding its branches are now keeping it upright as much as its roots. Some pictures of the Tree Council AGM in 2011. It's great to see that the Tree Council is continuing to progress and do things and to cooperate with each other and to get good respect from the government and private business as well. So it's all due to the work of the various partners within the Tree Council and the volunteers, such as happens here to this day. We had a little trip around last 2023. We visited some parks in South Dublin, particularly Timon Park, where the first tree was planted by Professor Clark. And here you can see some of those who attended on the day. Also, we had Tree Week launch in Abbey Leaks a few years ago, and you can see some pictures from that. Taking these pictures, I think, is a fantastic idea to keep a record of these events. From the archives, we also got on the Late Late Show, and this was very interesting because the Late Late was what everybody watched. And again, I wrote to them and they said yes. And I gave them the idea of having pictures of trees for the audience to guess what the names were. And they came up with that idea, but we had to get the pictures printed 14 by 14, which we did. A most unusual size. It was very difficult. And Gayborn felt that, sure, the people won't know these trees, but what about it? And several people knew them, to his surprise. And Quilcher provided a prize of a weekend, or a week, I think it was, up in Monaghan, in the Forest Park, in the housing that I have up there. And then we also had videos done of the Tree Council to promote it. And Tim Severin was the man we got to launch 3 Week down in Glenstall Abbey, something I should have mentioned earlier. So that's some of the archives. Our last picture is of by Kevin Hutchinson of trees in a winter scene, and he just to pay memory to Kevin for his work in the past.
Thanks, Christy. That's wonderful stuff in terms of the origin and the early days of the Tree Council. Christy, just to see that it is the 40th anniversary of the Tree Council. In relation specifically to urban trees,
yes,
in areas, have you seen much change in those 40 years in terms of things getting better or worse?
It depends on where you are, Brendan. In Dublin City and in the counties around Dublin, you have established Parks Department with some with 3 officers and the rest with Parks and Landscape officers who are skilled in the knowledge of trees and trained skilled gardeners who take care of trees. Number one, in their planting programs, which are quite extensive, they have the right species and they have the right aftercare. But unfortunately, when you leave Dublin, even go into Meath, there are no uh, officers in the local authority who are skilled in the management of parks or open spaces. They have those, but they're not trained people, and that's the problem. And this is a problem around the country. In many cases, the wrong species or the tree isn't maintained afterwards. It doesn't, either it's not watered, or the stakes are not removed, or it's not pruned when it needs formative pruning, particularly for street trees. So all of that is a lack of skills within the country.
So we certainly have a lot more to do in terms of getting all the councils across the country up to speed on, the technical requirements and the expertise and everything else.
That's true.
As a foundation for doing the urban greenery. Okay, Christy, well, thanks a million for that. It's fascinating talk. As I say, you bring back a lot of memories from the entire history of the Tree Council, and it's great that you're still here, involved and interested. So again, on behalf of everybody at the Tree Council, thanks a million, Christy.
Well, thank you, Brendan, and thank you, Orla, and thank you, Siobhan, for facilitating the whole process. And we look forward to more activities in the Tree Council in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.